to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the bullet.
Real gangsters go to the polls.
Information is power. If you don't have the information, one cannot seize power.
So we gotta get together in Chicago, we gotta get together in LA, we gotta get together in Houston, we gotta get together in New York, we gotta get together in Detroit, we just gotta get together.
You need to think about becoming mentally competitive.
Not the regular people in the street, I'm talking about street niggas, I'm talking about niggas that call themselves gangsters.
I have to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the bullet.
Going to make the difference. You know, that's that sleeping giant. That's that 40% apathetic vote within our black community.
You need to think about becoming mentally competitive.
And a weak that sleeping giant.
You play it and you play it to win, because in the real world, no one wants to hear excuses or empty rhetoric. No. They want to know you have a plan.
Individuals who were responsible for 70% of 242 shootings. 25 people. So he understood that his work was much easier and far less complicated than what the news may have presented or what, policy papers may have said. He said 25 people. So he sent his street team, guys with credibility in the communities, guys who have walked in the shoes of these young people before, to go out and to find those 25 people. And he was successful in terms of bringing in 21 of them, and significantly reduced the incidence of gun-related violence and homicides. Their homicide rate has dropped from 47 to 16 between 2007 and 2013.
Now that's saying something for Richmond, because if you're a Bay Area native, Richmond was one of the most violent cities in California, really.
Right. They had a homicide rate of 49 people per every 100,000. Right. So, but his in Richmond, they use a very novel approach. They say instead of taking the resources and pouring them into programs and putting them into more policing, why don't we take these resources and invest them into these young people through a partnership, right? Where, when they brought in those 21 people, that was the beginning of a process where they began to build a partnership with them around reducing homicides, right? And the impact is clear, but nonetheless, he still has challenges around, political blowback around how he does what it is that he do. But nonetheless, you can see the evidence in the reduction of homicides.
But why is that? I mean, why would there be political blowback at something that works? We know for over 30 years our community has been plagued by crime.
Well, I'll put it this way. I think that, in a capitalistic system, some people have found ways to benefit off of crime. In Richmond, they have a $75 million budget for police, right? So when, they have several individuals on the police force who makes, $300,000 and above, right, in salary, but the base salary is $90,000, where the majority of their income, they're making it from overtime. Overtime to do what? To patrol the streets and to police, these communities where you have the high incidence of violence. And it's the same here, right?
So for those, because recently, and I think, the current district supervisor, she was involved, and they were talking about adding more police to the community.
Right.
So basically what you're saying, because, police department already has a big budget anyway. So basically what you're saying is we don't necessarily need more police.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think, the police they have a role to play, but their role is not necessarily to prevent crime, right? Their job is to solve the crime, after it happens or whatnot. And, so if we're really talking about taking a bite out of the homicide rate and the violence rate, gun violence rate here in San Francisco, we're going to have to take a different approach that entails investing in these young people. And I'll give you an example of something. I mean, for me, it's hard to have a conversation with folks about violence without talking about what's happening in the public school system. So, you know, in the public school system, you have a 70% dropout rate for African American males, many of which have been criminalized while they've been in school. So you have young men who are dropping out, who are on probation and parole. And there's a direct correlation between those individuals that are out in the streets shooting and the ones who are being killed. You know, 9 times out of 10, they're a high school dropout and they're on probation and parole. So, and it's a difficult kind of conversation. I support teachers, I support unions wholeheartedly, but what I don't support is the outcome, as it relates to black and brown youth, where we see this high dropout rate. And the challenge is that, how do we begin to have a conversation in a way where we recognize that all of these children are our children versus those people's children, right? And when we adopt that mentality, we'll become more responsible around the fact that, some of these kids we knew couldn't read when they were in 3rd and 4th grade, but yet we kicked the can down the road and passed them on to the point to where when they got in high school, they began to realize that they don't fit in anymore and this is not fun, right? Right. So next thing you know, they find themselves on the street. And then I'll say this though, too, in regards to education. Oftentimes you hear that it's the parents' responsibility. And to some extent, I agree with that. But what I do say to people is that if we know a situation with a child where the parent is not there, mother and father, for whatever reason, is not necessarily present in that child's life, is it okay for every other responsible adult to neglect that child as well, right? Or to turn a blind eye to what's happening with that kid in the household, or to pass the buck, or to kick the can down the road because this is not our kid, or this is these people's children.
I mean, it does definitely, take a village. You're one of the, I think you're the only candidate that's running that's actually a native District 10. Am I wrong?
I think to some extent that might be.
What makes you the best candidate for District 10?
Well, I'm not running for office as a career. I'm running for office because, one, I believe I'm qualified. I mean, in addition to, working extensively in the housing arena and understanding the politics of land use, right, and who the different players are. I have a very in-depth financial background. A lot of people, what they don't know about me is that, at a very young age of 20, I worked as a trader on the floor of the Pacific Stock Exchange. I actually traded options, right, derivatives or whatnot. And a lot of people are blown away when they start to find out how in-depth, my knowledge is. Also, I'm a certified economic development finance professional, meaning that I have gone through the training around the equity strategies and have actually had an opportunity to begin to execute and to implement upon those strategies, whether it was in the area of housing or the area of economic development. I tell a story that, bringing in, being a part of a conversation at SFHDC when we brought in Radio Africa, which is right on the corner of 3rd and Oakdale. I tell folks it is not a coincidence that we have a Radio Africa on the corner of 3rd and Oakdale. That was very deliberate. And we sat down with the owner and we asked him a question: what do you need to be successful? And he said, I needed assistance with the rent. So we said, okay, we'll give you free rent, right? He's still there. You know what I mean? So there are various things and strategies that we can implement around economic development and building up the businesses along 3rd Street and attracting retailers to that area, because the reality is that as a low-income neighborhood, our income levels are not high enough to attract retailers on our own. So therefore, we have to incentivize. An out-of-the-box thinker, a person who knows how to execute. I mean, I left SFHDC in an effort to start a foreclosure rescue program where I've helped a number of people to remain in their homes through an acquisition strategy, right? These are the kind of things that I bring to the table, and that in addition to understanding things on a policy level and how to move policy through City Hall. I think that's what separates me from the other candidates. I mean, I've done the work, hands-on, created programs to do different things, and I understand it from a policy standpoint by moving legislation through City Hall. Sweat, blood, and tears. I mean, I've lost, family members, my older brother, was actually, shot and killed in Baby Hunters Point in 2007. I've lost friends or whatnot, so I care. I care about what happens not only in Baby Hunters Point, but also in District 10. Because, I tell people, Potrero Hill, there is an alliance to be built with the folks in Potrero Hill. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a lot to be learned from folks in Potrero Hill and the manner in which they have organized around their community or whatnot. To some extent the same is true for Viz Valley. And I think that as a district, we need to begin to look at, how do we forge these partnerships in order to make it a stronger district instead of looking at it as individual neighborhoods.
Right. And with that, we come to a close with our interview with Ed Donaldson, the man with the plan.
You have to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the book.